Welcome to Moving Forward, conversations on culture, identity, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Linda Anderson, and I created this podcast as a space for real, heartfelt conversations with people who are reflecting, evolving, and boldly stepping into what's next. This podcast was born out of my own journey through seasons of loss, transition, and transformation, and my belief that healing happens when we come together to share our stories. My hope is that these conversations will inspire you to pause, reflect, and find courage as you move forward in your own life. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Eddie Velez, a passionate educator and solution tree associate who has dedicated his career to transforming school culture and redefining what education can be. So as a principal of Kennedy High School in Fremont, Eddie and his team built a school grounded in innovation, equity, and collaboration. I had the privilege of working with Eddie during my time as Director of Curriculum and Instruction in Fremont Unified, and I was inspired by his creativity, dedication, commitment to students and staff. Eddie believes that if your school culture is not strong enough to compete with outside influences that are dictating student and staff behaviors, you do not have a culture. You have an institution. So today he'll share his experiences, strategies, and insights on building strong, inclusive school communities where every student has the opportunity to thrive. Eddie, welcome and thank you so much for joining me, even with your such a busy schedule.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. And I mean, if anybody just seems like it'll be having a conversation on a podcast, it'd be Linda Anderson. You know, if the listeners could see the smile on your face, they would be tuning in to every episode. So thanks for having me. It's great to see you and hear your voice.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to see and hear. I know they can't see you, but see you and also hear your voice too. So Eddie, you've worn many hats, as I've said in the intro, and you were a teacher, a principal, and now a facilitator for Solution Tree. What drew you into this next chapter of helping schools across the country?
Oh boy. So I think really what it boils down to for a lot of us is we find, teaching, I think education allows us a avenue to find out who we are and how we serve. And for me in particular, I think it was important as I started teaching that even though I was a history teacher, I really had a passion and did my master's research for gang intervention and helping students who were involved in gangs to engage in school and be able to be successful. That led me into administration because I felt like I could have such a bigger difference and bigger influence on students through the role of, a community leader. And then as many of us know, sometimes an opportunity for principal comes when you're not ready. And the timing wasn't great, but I took the jump when we had a great principal who decided to move on because I wanted to make sure that the stamp that we started on the school moved. After that, and we'll talk about the principal stuff I'm sure throughout the podcast, but I just have to say that there's some of us are given a gift of knowing that we have a purpose and a calling that is bigger than a district. I mix no words about it and hope that people don't take this the wrong way, but I'm a big person grounded in faith, and I believe that we're all put here for a reason. And the first reason I think in education was for me to find myself, moving on to helping people to finding people that needed help. And at the point when we had done a good job at Kennedy and we had become a distinguished school, I really felt like the blessings I had were actually turning into a bigger calling. And I felt like, it's the purpose was there. I couldn't ignore a feeling. I would wake up often and just know that I was being called to help and serve in a bigger capacity. And so it was literally a leap of faith with, no guaranteed income, no guaranteed stability, just knowing that it's not a hunch, it's a calling. And, I stepped right into it and can just say that it filled my tank to be able to go to places that people don't have faith um, in success and in kids and in teachers and build that faith and watch it grow. And so that was really the reason behind it. And I remember talking to my staff at the staff meeting when I told them I wouldn't be coming back. I used those words and said, there's a calling and a purpose for me that's bigger than Kennedy. And I don't know where it's going to take me, but I do know it's where I belong. And so I started the journey, and 2 years later, I'm here and, like you said, traveling across the country, but only taking on schools that are in dire need of help and improvement.
Mm.
And so it's been a great experience, and I think that leap of faith has helped me to know that that I'm supposed to be there, and it's my job to figure out how to help. And so that really was the main ingredient in the big jump. And I couldn't say that I could be more fulfilled because of the folks that I've met, and I think the things that we've been able to do.
I hope the listeners are, I don't know if they can get this right away, but your authenticity, you're real. And I think that's what also drew me to you that, just because you're a real person, you're speaking from your heart. And I appreciate that. And I know that that had a lot to do, at least my opinion of how you did move forward, because you are a real person speaking again from your heart with the focus and lens on doing what's best for kids, staff, just about everybody too, not just the students and staff. So I thank you that. So and the next question I have for you is when you look back on your time at Kennedy High, what experiences most shaped the way you approach the culture and leadership? What helped you continue to move forward because you kept moving forward?
I think there was really three big ones, and I think the community knows about one of them. I think Kennedy themselves knows about two of them, and then personally, there's a third one, and so I'll share those with you. I
Okay.
think the big one that shaped my experiences, the leadership and the direction, was the year before I got there. Unfortunately, there was a stabbing on campus,
Hmm.
and nobody really applied or wanted the job as assistant principal. And the stabbing was gang related, and I was in the middle of trying to curb gang activity on campus without getting rid of the students, just getting rid of the activity. And so I jumped into it. I loved it. And we were very clearly told in the beginning of the year, this shall never happen again. And on
Hmm.
day two of my first year, there was a second stabbing. Right. And so that's not what defined Kennedy, but at the same time, outside of our walls, that's exactly what defined our school. And we never got out from under that rock. And so it wanted, I knew that we needed to accept who we were, accept who comes to our school, accept what our past is, and then build our own narrative. So that was really the first experience that shaped. The second one was a series in the first 3 months that I was principal.
Hmm.
Um, Trial by fire has been my introduction to education. If we have time later, we'll talk about my first year of teaching, but that was trial by fire. But in the first 3 months, my first month as principal, unfortunately, we had a teacher who was arrested and convicted of inappropriate acts with a minor at our site. And I had to deal with that being 30 days into the job. Um, I chose, instead of having the district address the staff, I chose to stand in front of the staff and say, this is where I choose to be, and you stand behind me. Right. And I think that was important, even though I was nervous, to be able to lead with a positive mindset and say, we're going to get through this. We again are accepting two of the worst things that can happen at a site, a stabbing, and then now, one of these things that's in the news. And so that was the first thing. 20 days later, my father died. And I was not just put and dealing with the emotions. I immediately became a patriarch of two families at the age of 33. And so
Hmm.
it really pushed the envelope on grounding yourself in doing what's right and making sure that you you do what looks like is impossible through believing in something bigger than yourself. And not more than a month later, the most beloved teacher on our campus passed away in a freak accident. And so, those 3 months, I remember sitting across the superintendent, and he just said, basically, you've some principals go a whole career never see any of these. You've seen the three big ones in a
Yeah.
matter of. And I think that was the second big thing that shaped, because it forced me to be a leader, make decisions, and step in front of things without having the experience to do so. And then the last thing was, even though we were a school of school improvement, I live in the attendance area, the American attendance area, which is a high achieving, high A to G high school. And I took my kids, disenrolled them from American and put them at Kennedy,
Mhm.
because that's really where I developed my mission, that if you're going to be a principal, you need to be a principal at a place you'd send your own kids. And so my kids went there. They didn't have any special treatment. We put them through the tumbler in the scheduler, and they got who they got, and we did them no special favors. And the blessing of being able to be a parent and a principal at a school, I think, was the biggest impact, because
Mhm.
um, I also would not jump at opportunities when my kids would tell me this teacher's treating me unfair, and I knew it was happening. It was like most 1,400 other parents cannot do anything about it. And so it really helped me to see what the culture was like from a parent perspective. Um, and I think those are the three things that really were the experience that shaped how I approached, okay, now we're here. What are we going to do to change these three things? And I think, as you can kind of put these together, some of them gave me the grit and the
Mhm.
wherewithal to know that I can stand in front of tough things. And the rest of them gave me a standpoint to say, we need to build, and we're going to keep moving forward. And so those three things, I think, really helped in making that possible.
And you just said the two words that I was going to say, which is the title of this podcast is Moving Forward. You moved forward. And I think with a lot of hope, and just the way you transitioned into different parts of taking care of yourself too. I know that at Kennedy, your team did develop pride. So, and again, prepared, respectful, impact, discipline, and explore. It took 3 years though to create that shared vision, if I'm remembering. What were the biggest lessons that you learned about getting everybody aligned with that vision? Yeah.
That's a great question, because it was probably one of the favorite things I did, and it's one of the things that I think has helped me to be most successful across the country with schools that we can honestly say are in a state of dysfunction.
Mhm.
Um, I learned a lot from working with kids in gangs, and the number one thing is, contrary to what everybody believes, kids don't join gangs because they don't have a good family life, or they're seeking attention. Especially in Fremont, what we had were kids that were from two-parent homes. They were spoiled. There was no accountability, and the gang actually offered them a sense of accountability and something to stand for, and somebody to really basically um, discipline and put it to them if they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. And that was a big lesson for me. And so what I wanted to do, and as you said when you opened the podcast, the quote about, what I say, if the outside influences are dictating the behaviors on your campus, you, that is exactly what we're competing with. And so we fumbled around to find a way to build a culture that can compete with those outside influences. And I think that's where pride came from. And it
Mhm.
started with, instead of us hanging banners right away, we had a staff meeting. We went through a list of characteristics that we thought kids at Kennedy needed in order to be successful at school and beyond. And then we married those and asked kids the same questions. What do you need out of your teachers? And we started to marry those responses and find what the commonalities were. And then we started into clustering with data. I mean, I learned to be a data geek, and I'm proud to say that
Mhm.
I love data. And we used the data from responses and conversations, both qualitative and quantitative, to build lists of characteristics and then made the community come together and say, let's get creative with these and see if we can rank them in order, build an acronym, and hold to it. And so pride became, before our mission statement, before a vision statement, before anything, we had values that we were going to hold above and beyond anything else. And if you broke these, any of these five values, then you were going to be made to answer for it. But we also taught those just as much as we taught math, English, history, science, PE, and health. So the kids on the first day of school didn't even go to class. They went to period prepared for learning. They went to period respect. And so we had a full day of making sure students were exposed to what these values were and how they looked, how they felt, how they tasted, how they sounded, so that we can then start school the second day. And I think that really led to not so much just a better turnaround in behavior. We found it led to a better understanding of expected behavior. There's a big difference when you teach kids something and ask them to apply it every day versus when you come in and tell a kid you're being disrespectful and there's 1,400 different definitions of respect. We narrowed it down to one, which was you will practice self-regulation and empathy at the same time. So when you crossed Blakeow Road and you came to Kennedy, the definition of respect was the same for all 1,400 kids and all 75 teachers. And I think that's why it took 3 years. But the conversations we could have were no longer about behaviors. They were about why the action you had basically went against our culture's values. And that's when we were able to put in things like restorative practice and things like that. So I think it was a long, very long process, but it was meticulous as well.
So there's a couple of topics. Well, one that I wanted to get into, because now all this experience that I know the listeners are hearing, you're now working with Solution Tree. And with Solution Tree, you're helping schools build effective professional learning communities. But how does that, with your work with Kennedy, how does that help with building a strong school culture? How do they work together to improve student outcome, like you were talking about data? So you're now working for Solution Tree, professional learning communities, school culture. How do they work together to improve those student outcomes?
I think that's maybe what makes me a little bit different. There's a small part of Solution Tree that is kind of dedicated to building culture. And Dr. Anthony Muhammad is the one who is the guru on it. But most people are still looking at the skills and the academic discourse side of things, where I'm starting to make sure that if you're going to teach a subject in school, we should also be, if you're teaching the skills, then we also need to be teaching the will of the student. And so will and skill became the balance. And we should have ways, formative assessments, interventions, and clear tier one instruction for both sides, or else we can't expect for the student to be whole. And it's taken a while. It's in progress, but that's really where my passion lies. And I guess you've always known that about me, that I build culture first, and everything else will rise because of that culture. And so I'm in the middle of writing the book that basically says this is how the culture looks in a PLC format, so that some places I go, we have to start with culture, and some places I go, there's a strong culture and we have to start with rigor. But I think marrying the two is really a matter of making sure that I never go to a school with a boxed program and present. I want to spend a day there. I want to walk around. I want to talk to kids. I want to get into classrooms. I want to talk to parents, and I want to, as I call, sniff the culture and the rigor. And then day two, we can talk about what your strengths are, and let's build from that. And so I think that's where we want to go with Solution Tree. Those ideas of answering those four critical questions of what do we want students to learn and be able to do. You can say that for both academics and behavior, right? How will we know if those students are learning? You can say that for the same with academics and behavior, right? How do we respond when students aren't meeting grade level expectations. You can say that for academics and behavior. And more importantly, I think what we forget is question 4, and how do we extend the learning for those who have already shown mastery? Well, that's the same for academics. And I think that's where schools switch, right? They don't do the first 3 for behavior, but they're very good at celebrating kids who are well behaved. And they're not very good at extending learning for kids who've met grade level. They pat them on the back and they say congratulations, but they don't give them opportunities to really challenge themselves. And so really finding that you have to swap those two and make sure that we're very clear on the first 3 questions as well for behavior. But then PBIS does not work if all you're doing is positive incentives, right? If you're not helping the student and acknowledging small growth, then the student's never going to make it to the awards. And so I think that's how they intertwine in so many words that the book is taking a long time because I'm making sure that the approach to culture and behavior matches the 4 critical questions of a PLC so that we can do them both simultaneously.
I could probably sit here and listen to you for a very long time. And I appreciate the journey in your story that you told in the beginning because it does your story, I feel, in my opinion, has definitely taken you on these paths that you're on. And now you're able to share all this with so many people. And that's my next question is you now work with educators all over this country. What gives you hope when you think about the future of our education system?
Ooh. I think what gives me hope is that the tougher the neighborhood that I work in, the more willing the teachers, despite getting paid less and
Mm,
having less resources, the more willing they are to say, I've got to make this happen.
mm,
I think sometimes when we work in districts, and I have a new term, when you work in a district really where kids roll out of bed and they're proficient, we sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that we're great educators. And we kind of understand that failure is an option for some kids and we accept it. When you go to some of these schools across the country where the daily attendance rate is 60%, where the ELA and math proficiency rates are 0, you have teachers who will not take that they can't learn. They won't take that as something that they can sleep on. And I think that it's that idea as I travel the country that it's starting to grow and it's growing in the right places. My goal and my hope is that it'll start to grow in places where kids are already rolling out of bed because if you have 70% of your kids who are proficient, that means 30% of them are not going to make it. And I think, the better your district does, the less important that 30% tends to be in our actions, not in our words and our SIPSA plans, our Title I plans, but in our actions. And so I think that's one thing that gives me hope is that I've been to places where we've seen an investment in PLC and in just belief in a system that is turning around schools. One example I can give you just off the top of my head is I've been working. This is my 3rd year in Inglewood, and one of the high schools in Inglewood last year, with a very sharp focus on PLC, we were able to move the English proficiency to 86% school-wide at a high school,
oh my goodness.
and over 50% of those kids were advanced. Right?
Wow.
And it was just because we're not going to take no as an answer. And I think when you look at the fact that they had 2 substitutes the whole year in English at that high school,
Mm,
no excuses. That I think having the gift to be able to see that at work, and having the challenge of them to call me out when I first get there, it's like almost boot camp. They don't like me until they love me, right? But now to go onto that campus and you're getting high fives and the kids are knowing who you are and the teachers are like, we understand. I think that's the piece that's really been inspiring the hope that if you could do it in some of these places that didn't have hope, we don't need hope in places where kids are highly proficient. What we need is heart, and we need to not let people fall behind. And so I think it's a little bit harder sometimes in these districts to do that, but seeing it done gives us many times the fuel in the tank um, to keep moving forward, knowing that our investment paid off.
You keep using the word heart, and I love that because when we work from our heart and not from our head right away, and you've done it. I mean, that's who you are. You work from your heart. And so I appreciate that because this next question, though, I'm curious and to hear what you say with it is as you look back on your journey, and the listeners have heard in this short time so much about your journey, but what do you hope your legacy will be? Both not only with Solution Tree, with the work you're doing now, but also at Kennedy.
Well, I guess I'll start with Kennedy. I want my legacy to be just um, he took no prisoners, and he didn't take any prisoners because he didn't have to.
Hmm.
I think that is for me, it's not really a riddle, but nobody moved forward because I made them there. Everybody moved forward because I made them feel special. And I think I want my legacy to be exactly what you said. He had a big heart, but he was not flexible on student learning and doing what's right for kids. And I think for me, that would be incredible. My legacy is already there. Having 3 students who graduated from that school, it's in permanent history. When I got there were 7 NCS banners up that we had been able to earn over the 48 years in existence. And when I left, there were 23. And, if you know things about high school sports, NCS banners are not easy to get, but 3/4 of those were because we had varsity teams with the highest GPA in that sport in Northern California. And when I look at legacies, I love the fact that Kennedy hung those banners because anytime I can go in, I can look and say, how many of those banners came before 2013? And how many came between 2013 and 2023? And it's a stamped legacy, I think, for me. Um, as far as maybe other things, I want people just to be happy that they met me. And I want people to have a conversation someday that says, that it's not that this man changed our school, it's this man inspired the change at our school. And so, I do believe that the biggest compliment you can have in my legacy is, um, was I somebody who was serving schools, or was I somebody who was lip servicing schools? And I think serving schools is the path that I chose to be on. And so I think the best legacy you can have is no job was too small and no task was too big. And so hopefully that's a stamp that people see.
Oh, okay. I'm sad this is going to end, but so anyway, I want to thank you so much, Eddie, for joining us on this episode. Listeners, he reminds us that creating a thriving school culture isn't just about policies and procedures. I hope you all heard that. It's about people. I got to pull that out real high. Purpose and possibility. So and Eddie was saying, when leaders, teachers, and communities come together with a shared vision, we can build schools where every student feels seen, supported, and capable of success. If Eddie's message resonated with you, I encourage you to connect with him and explore more about his work with Solution Tree. And I hope you heard that he's writing a book, and I can't wait to hear and see and read that. Please let us know when it comes out so I can share with everybody. And if you did enjoy today's episode, please follow this podcast by clicking the subscribe button and share it with others and leave a review. And until next time, keep moving forward with culture, identity, healing, and hope at the heart of everything you do. Bye, Eddie. It was great to talk to you.
Great to be here.